So the Las Vegas Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce was non-committed to Gardner Minshew as the Las Vegas Raiders starting quarterback. After 3 weeks of football, the Raiders may already have a change at the quarterback position. But more than that, AP also gave us some insight into the whole business decision comment that he made. Plus, we got some tape of Jackson Powers-Johnson, and trust me when I say this, the guy looked really, really good. We'll talk about him at the end of this video, but let's just get right into it. Let's talk about Gardner Minshew potentially not being the Las Vegas Raiders quarterback, because Antonio Pierce was asked specifically if he's committed to Gardner Minshew, and check out what he had to say.
Could that mean anything going forward, or is it still Gardner still the guy?
I think we got to give it the players and just evaluate everything from yesterday first.
To me, to hear that Antonio Pierce is saying that we need to evaluate everything from yesterday first before we commit to Gardner Minshew tells me that the Raiders are not 100% sure if Gardner Minshew is their quarterback. But I also do think Antonio Pierce sometimes does slip up. Sometimes he doesn't want to tell you everything, or sometimes he overshares. And I don't think the Raiders are actually going to make a change at the quarterback position. So you can go forward with Aidan O'Connell as your quarterback. You can say against the Cleveland Browns, a pretty good defensive line nonetheless. We're going to make that change. We're going to go from Gardner Minshew to Aidan O'Connell, and we're not going to look back. But if you don't make other changes that we'll talk about here, if the Raiders don't make other changes, Aidan O'Connell is going to end up having literally the same exact issues that Gardner Minshew's having, which is that on one play, it's Cody Whitehair getting blown up and tossed into the quarterback. Then on the next play, a guy doesn't run the proper route. Right? There's been so many issues with the Las Vegas Raiders offensive coach and offensive line that we haven't really given Gardner Minshew a fair chance to actually have success. To me, Gardner Minshew is not a terrible quarterback. You can win with that. But you got to have a good play caller. You got to have a good play designer. You got to have a good run game. And we don't have any of that right now. In fact, Antonio Pierce was asked specifically about what he saw with Gardner Minshew, and he basically said the same exact things.
After watching the film, anything jump out as far as Gardner and the passing offense that you saw on the film?
Yeah, I mean, there's some plays that I know, obviously, we always say, you want to make and take advantage of. But I thought we did do some good things. The problem is, when you don't win on early downs, these longer third downs that's not in the best interest of our offense and Gardner. So we got to do a better job on early downs and make it easier for him on third down.
Now, of course, AP with that statement did say that there are things that we got to take advantage of, right, that we've seen on tape. Essentially, the Raiders got to be able to make some plays. But more than that, he also said that when you don't win on early downs, it makes it hard for the quarterback on third downs. And to me, that was the Raiders' biggest issue right there. Right, the Raiders on first and second down did not have success. So if you don't have success on first and second down, what ends up happening is you then get put into a position on third downs where you're in like a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. That's a third down and long situation when you're not having explosive plays, which, let's be honest, the Raiders didn't have a ton of explosive plays yesterday. We had the one pass to Trey Tucker, and we had another drive which ended up all the way down to where the Raiders were in like a 3rd and 7 situation, and then they ran the football for 3 yards, and then on 4th and 3, 4th and 4, they decided to go for it. And that 4th down play was in the middle of the second quarter. Cody Whitehair got pushed right back into Gardner Minshew. Minshew went from the right, and he didn't like what he sees. He looked over to the left. Keep in mind, all his receivers are to the left. The second he looked over to the left, he had a guy right in his face. Right? To me, you're not going to be able to have success no matter who the quarterback is if you can't anchor down on the offensive line and allow a quarterback to play within a clean pocket. So to me, the Raiders got to do a better job across the board. Now, Gardner Minshew, I didn't think is the biggest issue so far, but we did see Aidan O'Connell as well. And Aidan O'Connell looked pretty good yesterday as well, right? You would be lying if you say Aidan O'Connell did not look sharp out there. I think he finished 9 of 12. He had a touchdown. He did have one play that was essentially a sack, where he kind of ran into a sack. And he had another play where it was basically a dropped interception. But I'll be honest with you guys, that dropped interception, that stuff happens, especially when you're not 100% comfortable with the offensive line. And I'm sure Aidan O'Connell sees what Gardner Minshew's been kind of going through up to this point. But Antonio Pierce was asked about Aidan O'Connell as well, and check out what he had to say about O'Connell.
What did you see from Aidan in his limited spot duty there? I know you talked yesterday about just giving him a shot to see what he can do, but is there any chance whatsoever that gives you pause going forward?
Well, I just think, you look at how the game went. We're down by 2 scores or so. Let Aidan come in, see what he can do with the offense, move it. We're just trying to look for a spark.
Could that mean anything going forward, or is it still Gardner still the guy?
I think we got to give it the players and just evaluate everything from yesterday first.
Now, to me, the Las Vegas Raiders should stick with Gardner Minshew for 2 or 3 more games, and before they actually switch over to Aidan O'Connell, they should give Gardner Minshew every opportunity. Plus, they need to make some switches on the offensive line. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson looked really, really good. He should be a starting offensive lineman for the Raiders come this next week. In fact, watching his 21 snaps, it was incredible, man. And we'll get into that here in a second. But I want to first and foremost actually talk to you guys about the business decision comments that Antonio Pierce talked about yesterday in his presser. So AP, if you guys don't know, obviously put it out there that some people made a business decision, that were Las Vegas Raiders. He didn't say players or coaches, but he says someone within the Raiders made a business decision during that game against the Panthers. So us as a team, we're going to make a business decision as well. And that was what Antonio Pierce said, and that got everybody speculating. Some people were like, hey, is it Trayvon Merrick? Is it, the quarterback Gardner Minshew? Like, did Minshew not want to go out there on that final drive? Or was it someone like Jack Jones, right? The national media specifically went right at Jack Jones for his inability to tackle. And the thing is Jack Jones has been a terrible tackler pretty much every single week this season, and even in the preseason games, it was bad. Right, we talked about it, I believe it was week 1 where I mentioned it in the film breakdown the day after the game, that Jack Jones has to do a better job tackling. The effort also has to be a lot better. And, it's one thing if you're a bad tackler. It's a completely different thing if you're not putting your nose in there and actually putting that effort into making those plays. To me, Jack Jones is definitely not the guy that I think Antonio Pierce is talking about. Because Antonio Pierce was asked specifically, is Jack Jones the guy ultimately?
You said you haven't spoken to the players yet, but how do you expect them to react to the business decisions comment from you yesterday?
No, it's football, right? After a loss like that, things need to change.
There was some national media. They're trying to decipher who the business decision's about, and they're showing plays with Jack Jones. Did you, in particular, have any problem with Jack Jones's effort in the game?
I had a problem with our entire defense and their effort.
So AP is not necessarily saying it's Jack Jones, but he did put it out there that's the defense as a whole that's really struggling. And, I think yesterday when Antonio Pierce made that comment, right, the business decision comment, to me, I think Antonio Pierce spoke and said something that, right after he said it, he probably thought twice about it, that I maybe should not have said that specifically. Now, AP hasn't technically spoken with the team yet, right? They'll probably meet at some point later today. But as of this point, if you're the Las Vegas Raiders and you're Antonio Pierce, are you going to call out those individual players or are you going to call out the entire defense? We're going to find out, right? If Jack Jones ends up getting benched, then we'll know that he was the guy. But something tells me he's not going to end up getting benched. At the same time, I think Antonio Pierce is going to have to make sure that every player that's starting, every player that's playing has to be 100% committed to the Raiders. They have to be 100% committed to having success. They got to put the effort in. And, we also got some other unfortunate news. Marcus Epps has torn his ACL. He is out for the season. So it does suck if you're a Las Vegas Raiders, fan looking to have a top tier defense. Not saying that Marcus Epps, I think, was like a top 10 player at his position, but I think he was very important because he was a veteran. He understood the Patrick Graham scheme and system, and he's looked good up to this point. There was no issues with Marcus Epps' play. In fact, I think he was a really, really good football player for this scheme and system. And he is out now. Right, which sucks because Marcus Epps gave so much effort on every single play. I thought he was a really, really good player. But now the Raiders are going to have to look to, that next guy. Is it going to be Isaiah Pola-Mao? Is it going to be one of the other younger guys that we have, right? Chris Smith is technically there. We had Jaden Grant. I don't think he ever ended up getting picked up. Maybe the Raiders bring him back as well. There's definitely some guys out there that the Raiders could potentially replace Marcus Epps with, but he's also out at this point. And, Marcus Epps was one of the guys that gave a lot of effort. And Antonio Pierce is going to have to clean up the guys that aren't giving that effort he expected. Now, Antonio Pierce is also saying that the guys on the defensive side really didn't perform to what he wanted. And essentially his comment was to really put everybody out there, right? It wasn't just one guy or the other. But the thing that I think some people are missing is the fact that the Raiders struggled against the Panthers, not because of the lack of effort. At least in my opinion, I watched the tape. I don't think it was an effort thing for the Raiders. I think the Raiders ended up just getting their ass kicked up front. In fact, I've actually never seen the Raiders defensive line get bullied recently, right? Thinking just the last year and a half, 2 years. I've never seen the Raiders defensive line get bullied. The Panthers literally bullied those guys. Christian Wilkins got his ass kicked multiple times. Maxx Crosby straight up shut down multiple times across the board, right? I know they did certain things at certain points where they slid towards Wilkins. Maybe they chipped on Maxx. But there are a lot of one-on-one opportunities for those guys, and they got shut down. Damian Lewis, one of the best guards in the NFL. You got Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt absolutely held his own against Christian Wilkins. In fact, I would make the argument Robert Hunt won probably 98% of the time he went up one-on-one against Christian Wilkins. which is crazy to think. But Robert Hunt is one of the highest paid guards, right? The guy's making $20 million as a guard for a reason, right? The guy straight up dominated. And again, I've never seen the Raiders defensive line get bullied the way they did against the Panthers. I actually did not think that I would say this after this game, right? I think the Panthers have one of the top 2 or 3 offensive lines in the NFL. I truly think, and with Andy Dalton, especially at quarterback, as the Panthers go forward, I think the Panthers could potentially actually make a run and make it into the playoffs based off of the tape that I watched. And I know some people are going to say, oh, there's just no way. They're not a good football team. I disagree with that. I think the Carolina Panthers are going to be in every single game going forward. They're not going to get blown out going forward. As long as the defense side holds up. Obviously, the Raiders aren't that good on the offensive side, but the Panthers' offense is going to hold up. They have some playmakers, they have some weapons, and they have an absolute bully of an offensive line. I don't think the Raiders have, a lack of effort. That's, which was the main issue. I think their defensive guys just got their asses kicked. I think Maxx Crosby got his ass kicked. I think Christian Wilkins got his ass kicked. Adam Butler got his ass kicked. And then whichever defensive end it was, Tyree, Snowden, or Robinson, whoever it was, that guy got his ass kicked as well. We just got ran over, right? And I think this should be a wake-up call for the Raiders on the defensive side. Now, I also looked at the rest of our schedule. We're not going to play another offensive line the way I think the Panthers are essentially built, right? They got 2 great guards. Their center's pretty solid. Their tackles are very solid as well. I don't think we play another offensive line like the Panthers. Now, we'll play the Chiefs, who do have a good offensive line, but the Chiefs' tackles aren't very good. We'll play the Falcons. I think the Falcons are probably the best offensive line, but the Falcons are like 275-pound guys across the board. The Falcons are really built for like that wide zone run, right? They're not really built to handle in pass pro specifically. But I do think the Falcons also match up pretty well against the Raiders because the Falcons have Chris Lindstrom, who's one of the best right guards in the NFL. Drew Dalman's a very good center. And then, of course, their left guard, Matthew Bergeron, now in his second year, is pretty solid as well. But I think their tackles could struggle against our edge guys, essentially. But, the Raiders got bullied. And I think that's one of those things that's not going to be talked about enough, right? The Raiders struggle on the offensive side, right? Our offensive line's really bad. I think the Raiders have a bottom 5 offensive line if Jackson Powers-Johnson is not in there. Now, if Powers-Johnson is in there, the Raiders are a lot better, man. Let's just talk about this kid a little bit. I watched every single one of the 21 snaps that Powers-Johnson played. It's incredible. The first play that stood out to me right away was Powers-Johnson just straight up pancaking this defensive lineman, helping out DJ Glaze. Incredible play with Powers-Johnson. But just play in, play out. The guy moves really well. Very quick processor, saw things, right? Didn't get tricked, didn't panic. He was never under duress that, hey, who do I block or whatever. Everything about Powers-Johnson was just cool and collective. He was calm. He was just incredible in my opinion. He saw everything well. He processed well, picked up, passed off defensive line games well. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson is going to actually be a really good football player for the Raiders. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson might already be the Raiders' best offensive lineman. And I know it's just one game. It's 21 snaps, rookie, first ever action in the NFL. But from left guard to right tackle, the Raiders suck. Every single one of those guys, left guard to right tackle that started for the Raiders this game suck. Right? There's none of those guys that I would even say I wouldn't even want the Raiders to keep any of those guys, right? I would hope over the next 2 to 3 years to replace every single one of those guys. Dylan Parham's the only guy that I would keep, and I would actually move him to center. I think Dylan Parham was actually brought to the Raiders by Josh McDaniels to be the long-term center. I think after about 2 years, the Raiders were ultimately going to move him to center. And I think because of the fact that McDaniels and Ziegler got fired and a new regime came in, and that regime obviously decided to go with Andre James and kind of give him that new contract, restructure him or whatever. They ended up keeping him at center, but I think the plan was to put Dylan Parham at center. Dylan Parham's not strong enough to be a guard in the NFL. I do think he has huge upside as a center, and I would think it'd be smart for the Raiders to move him to the center position. And I think it'd be smart for the Raiders to put Powers-Johnson at left guard. Now, I don't know why they put him at right guard, to be honest. It doesn't make sense to me because I don't think Dylan Parham was an issue for the Raiders' offensive line. I think Cody Whitehair had so much more negative plays. Now, I'm not even sure if Whitehair just stays in there because of the fact that he's connected to Luke Getsy. I'm really not sure what the point of Cody Whitehair is, but for some reason, the Raiders are keeping Cody Whitehair in the game. Now, I think what would be smart is to put Powers-Johnson at left guard, let Miller continue to improve at left tackle, right? He started off slow. Hopefully he continues to get better. I do expect that Miller is going to struggle this season, right? Because of the fact that he really didn't have a good offseason. At the same time, right, let's put Parham at center. Let's figure out the right guard, right tackle position. Maybe Glaze is the future right tackle. Maybe Munford jumps to right guard. Maybe you put in Andres Pete at right guard, right? I don't really know what you do with that, right? But I would hope that over the next 2 years, the Raiders figure out that offensive line. Because when you compare the Panthers' offensive line, that's a group right there, man. The Raiders have a bottom 5 offensive line. I don't care what anybody says. It's crazy to me because this offseason, I said it the entire offseason, and so many people were disagreeing with me. Like, this unit could be top 10 or whatever, and it is not close to that. This unit is garbage. And to me, Jackson Powers Johnson looks really, really good. So I hope they start him from this point forward. I talked about it a couple times. You know, Powers Johnson, you know, he has some things going on. Right? Everybody, I think, pretty much sees it at this point. But the way he played yesterday, you know, he didn't play that physical. Let me put my helmet right into other people's helmet. Right? He just played smart. And if he just does that, I think the concussion aspect of it, he'll be able to kind of avoid. But generally speaking, I think the Raiders will bounce back as we kind of go forward. We'll see if the Raiders actually end up keeping Aidan O'Connell, or will put in Aidan O'Connell, or they'll end up keeping Gardner Minshew. I think the right thing to do is to try to fix that offensive line. Make the change on the offensive line first. Keep Gardner Minshew for 2 to 3 more games. If the play does not improve, roll forward with Aidan O'Connell. Because once you bench Gardner Minshew and you go forward with Aidan O'Connell, there's no coming back. Right? You're not going to go back to Gardner Minshew if Aidan O'Connell struggles for a couple of games. Right? So we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.